Very special thanks once again to Affordable Prestige Cars in Glastonbury. Of course, I've worked with them a number of times on the channel and they're always a pleasure to work with for some pretty cool cars. If you haven't checked out the other reviews that I've done with them, be sure to do so. And of course, you can check out all of their current stock down in the video description. The very first thing that I want to clear up as we go into this review is pertaining to the thumbnail. Was that just clickbait, or do I genuinely believe that this Jaguar is better than a Maserati? I've reviewed a couple of Maseratis, and of course, any of you who know me on the channel know that Maserati is my favourite brand, so I don't take a statement like that lightly. Well, yes, I do believe that that's true, and the reason why is because, well, this offers basically everything that you would usually want from a Maserati, but with a number of notable advantages. Now, although I'm going to refer to Maserati a couple of times, when I say these comparisons, I'm referring to more the broader sports car scene, but Maserati is a pretty good example. See, with a Maserati, you want some very specific things. You want a cool badge, you want a great look, a stunning sound, and a lot of fun to drive. Everything else is kind of secondary to that. You don't buy a Maserati for it to be the most practical thing around, necessarily the most affordable thing around, and certainly not the most reliable thing around. You'll occasionally have one that's running well, but they have a reputation for a reason. In the case of this Jag, well, it looks great, it sounds fantastic with pretty much any engine choice, but unlike the Maserati, it's easier to find, easier to get dealership support because of the sheer amount of them that there are, it's more reliable, has better fuel economy, and is arguably more useful on a day-to-day basis if you decided to do so. Now, those are some bold claims, so let's back them up. First of all, let's talk about what you all want to know. Fuel economy. Now, of course, I'm going to get into performance, but I do think it's interesting to note just how impressive this car is. A lot more impressive than it arguably should be, really, for a pure sports car. Now, I'm going to also compare it to the XK in just a second, because of course that is something that needs to be mentioned. But this particular car, which is the V6, of course the V6S in particular, which is a supercharged 3-litre V6 engine. It's larger, of course, than the entry-level 2-litre turbo, not quite as big as the 5-litre supercharged V8, and of course those special editions as well, like the Project 7, but it's a pretty cracking engine, and it's a very popular one as well. The sound is fantastic. I'm not a huge fan of 6-cylinder cars, typically I'm more of a V8 kind of guy, but even I will say that this sounds absolutely fantastic. So, speaking to that V6, it has 375 horsepower, which is more than the entry-level V6, which has more like 335. It's got 340 pound-feet of torque, which is again very good for a V6, and considering that even in this open-top form, it doesn't weigh that much more than 1,600 kilos, well, those are some pretty good numbers to be working with. It's not the most powerful thing out there, but that's kind of the point. It's more the middle of the batch. And one of the great things about the F Type is, you could argue even more so than the XK really, and much like the Porsche 911, which I often praise for this, there are a number of options to work with. So it's not just, here's your sports car, enjoy it or don't. It's, here's your sports car, now choose which level you want. And that's always a great choice to have, if at all possible, because you can just appeal to a wider audience. So, let's get back on track with performance. 4.8 seconds to 60, and I'm glad to say no speed limiter. Unlike the XK, this can do 171 miles an hour straight out of the box, and that is pretty great performance as well, considering that that's not even the top of the range. The handling is precise, it's a lot of fun actually, and not to dog on Aston Martin overly, but I did of course review a white 2014 Vantage, which was the final of that era. And to be honest, I have to say I prefer the handling on the Jaguar. The Aston Martin wasn't bad by any stretch, but I just had more feedback from the Jag. And bearing in mind that the car is a year older technically than that model generation, that's not bad, 2013 compared to 2014. Now, in terms of that economy, just to go back to it for a second, one of the things that I really like about the XK, and even the XKR and the XFR as well, is that the economy is surprisingly good for such powerful V8 or V6 in this case cars. Now consider these numbers. This car can do 22 miles per gallon around town. It can do 40 on the highway, and combined it averages 31. That is very impressive for a car with 375 horsepower, V6 or otherwise. And when you combine that with the 72-litre fuel tank, which is 15.8 UK gallons, that means that this car can literally cover almost 500 miles on a tank of petrol. That, for a pure sports car, is very impressive. It means that, true to Jaguar tradition, you can drive it very long distances comfortably if you choose to. In fact, the economy overall is better than an XK. That is not bad considering that the performance is better as well. Now, in terms of used prices, value, what you can actually get from this compared to its rivals, say Maserati, Aston, maybe even something else too, well, that is another way that Jaguar is very impressive to me. One of the things I love about them, in fact, is both new and used, they give you so much for the money. This particular car, for example, is about £27,000, just under. Now, for a car of that type with this spec, yes, it's a little bit older now, but it certainly doesn't come off as old by any stretch. It still looks fantastic, and you can find some which are a little bit less, maybe 22, 24,000 occasionally. That's pretty amazing pricing, I think. And to put that into some perspective, you're going to be paying at least that much for a Maserati of that era, probably more most of the time for something like a Gran Turismo, for instance, and certainly for a Gran Cabrio you're going to be paying a lot more than that. And if you compare it to Aston, which is the best comparison to make, that Vantage which I drove was 50 grand, double the price of this car, but this is at least as quick and at least as fun. Now, to me, there are two significant things that both Maserati and Aston Martin have that this Jag doesn't, and it's no fault of its own, it's just the way it is on the market. Astons and Maseratis are just that car. When you show up in one, when you tell someone that you own one, it just has the cool factor. Maseratis are just cool. Aston Martins are just cool. Jaguars are cool, but not in the same way. They don't have that same unicorn-style status. So if that is hugely important to you, you might want to consider a Maserati. I certainly would consider one as well because I love them, but for sheer value for money, I would argue there's actually not much of a comparison to make. The Jaguar gives you so much more for such a great price. Don't even bother comparing it to the Aston of that era because they're not even close in terms of value. To me, this is a fantastic choice of sports car. And that's coming from someone who's not even a strict sports car fan. A sports car is not my kind of car at all, really. I actually like my performance cars to have some level of practicality in terms of having at least 4 seats, decent trunk space, you know, that more daily driver kind of stuff if you want it. That's one of the reasons why I do actually prefer the XK over the F Type, and I continue to do so because it's just more my kind of car. However, I will say that if I were going to buy something like a pure 2-seater open top, this would definitely be on the list, because again, the looks are even kind of similar to something like a Maserati, especially from the back, and incidentally you can tell the F-Types apart pretty easily from the back. The 2-litre has a large single exhaust, the V6 has a twin exhaust, and of course the V8s have the 4 exhausts with 2 on either side, so you can tell them apart pretty quickly from the back. In terms of course, the interior, which is, as always, very important to me, well, I love the styling. It's got a gorgeous interior. I love that wraparound style center console, much like the older 90s Supra that I drove. I love that kind of interior. I love it on the C7 Corvette Stingray as well. Very driver focused, makes you feel enveloped and cozy in the car. Speaking of cozy though, this was of course the open top that I was driving, with the roof down as you can see. Incidentally, it takes 12 seconds to put the roof up or down, which is pretty nice. You can do that up to 30 miles an hour. The space is hard to completely gauge in terms of headroom, because of course I wasn't in the hard top. I think I might have a little bit of an issue with headroom in it based on this one, but I could always try maybe setting the seat a little bit lower. In terms of legroom though, I can tell you right now there were no issues at all. The seat goes way back, even to the point of kind of pressing up against the backboard if you want it to, so that's never going to be an issue. You could easily fit in this car if you're like 6'5", 6'6", with the roof down, and with the roof up, perhaps. To round off this review though, I'm going to get into 2 things which aren't necessarily downsides, they're just things which kind of stuck out to me. One of them isn't that important, and you could actually hear it at the start of the video. When I was revving the car, you could hear the sound kind of change from the deeper tone to a higher pitch, louder one, but also there was a slight metallic sound, like a scraping noise. That's actually because it has an active exhaust. and those baffles open and close, making that slight creaking sound. That doesn't matter at all while you're driving because you're never going to hear it, it's just when you're sitting there revving it that you sometimes can. So, as I said, not too important. The second thing that you will probably notice while driving is the gear change sounds. You can kind of hear the car clunking and clicking into a different gear, especially as you're slowing down and coming to a stop. Incidentally, it does have start-stop engine technology as well, which improves the economy even further, but that gear change noise is notable. Now, it's not annoying per se, it's just something which you don't typically hear, or I don't typically hear on a lot of the sports cars that I've driven, open top or otherwise. But again, it's not strictly even a downside, it's just something which I thought, I noticed that, and I usually wouldn't. Overall though, this review is actually fairly simple, because it's a great car, and it's nice to have those, but also makes reviewing it awkward because I'm basically telling you this is great for this, it's great for that, it's great for everything you need from a sports car, and there's not really too much to say that's controversial about it. In fact, that's kind of the point. Much like a Porsche 911, it's just a great choice, except if I were going to go for a sports car, I would probably go for this over something like a 911 because it has those same advantages of multiple choices of model, good reliability and build quality compared to a lot of the competition, especially from Italy, good prices, but also good used values. But critically for me, over something like an Audi R8 or a Porsche 911, it has more passion. It's noisier, it has that more British muscle kind of vibe, which I also love from the XK. So to me, if you're choosing between, for instance, something like an XK or an F Type, rather than an F Type compared to a different brand, I would say it really depends on what kind of sports car you want. If you're just looking purely for a toy, a weekend sports car, roof down, good weather, have fun, then the F Type is definitely for you. If you're like me, like that little bit of extra usability and practicality, well then absolutely go for the XK. It has the 2 extra seats, great space, it's a physically larger car. I actually prefer the look of the XK as well, although this is also stunning. I give this one the advantage on interior design, the XK for exterior, but overall, they're both great choices. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts on the F-Type V6S. Of course, check out my other Jaguar reviews here on the channel, such as the XK, the XKR, and the XFR, and stick around for more in future as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.